Hey, ladies, got a struggle? Need to vent? It's time to join your voice and get down to business with some critical thought, where like-minded ladies share their personal experiences to empower each other, using critical thinking to make wise decisions. And now, here's your host, Lady C.
Hi, this is Lady C. In this episode of The Critical Thought, under the special series, The Struggles of Jehovah's Witness Women, I'm going to be speaking with Joy Grant, who was affiliated with the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society for over 40 years. Being married to an elder at age 18 and invited to join the Bethel family at 20, she's had a front row seat to what goes on behind the Watchtower leadership. In this episode, she shares a wealth of knowledge in observing the Watchtower through her own personal experiences throughout the years and being a victim of their many broken promises. Joy, welcome to The Critical Thought.
Hi, Lady C. Thanks for having me on Critical Thought.
It is my pleasure to have you on the show, Joy. So tell me, how did your family get involved in the Jehovah's Witnesses?
I was very young. My parents in the late 50s began studying with Jehovah's Witnesses. They came around door to door, and in fact, I believe in the late 50s, 58, 59 is when they became baptized. So you could say I was raised as a witness, but I do remember both sides of my grandparents who weren't witnesses. We basically began to ignore them. First, they lived over 200 miles away, and we didn't really pay that much attention to them as much, as we should have, I feel, as a family. We always made sure we went to the meetings, even though they were there to visit us from so far away. We just lost touch with my parents' family.
Wow. How about you? When your parents became involved with the Jehovah's Witnesses, how did you feel about that as a youngster?
I was one of those overachievers that I wanted to do everything that was told to me. So, of course,
Okay.
I embraced the witnesses. I wanted to be a good publisher. I got baptized at age 14, began auxiliary pioneering is what it was called back then, anytime I could, especially during the summer months. And by the age 17, I graduated from high school a semester early so I could start pioneering even earlier and became a regular pioneer when I was 17.
Okay, so you were really immersed in that then at an early age.
Yes.
And what about your mom?
Yes.
I know when we had spoken previous, you had mentioned that both of your parents were college graduates at the time that they got baptized as Jehovah's Witnesses. What do you think attracted your parents as college graduates to this organization?
Well, I think my father was the one who was definitely the leader of the family. He was raised a Methodist, but didn't like the way that you can go from one church to another, and they would interpret the Bible differently. So when the witnesses could answer a question with the Bible verse and it is interpreted the same no matter what kingdom hall you went to, he found what he thought was unity and began embracing the idea. And I'm sure living on a paradise earth and never having to grow old and die was very appealing to them. My mother was
Right.
a primary school teacher, so what she had done once she started having her kids was she would substitute teach. She was a stay-at-home mom, but then she got so involved in the pioneer work. I can remember coming home from school and not having a mother there because she was out having her studies, or my parents in the evening would leave us kids at home to go on their Bible studies. They had home Bible studies.
Wow. So then your mother, despite having that college degree, pretty much dumped all that, what they would call worldly education, just kind of like got rid of that and now just became fully immersed in the Watchtower life, huh?
Right. With her primary school education, I'm sure she was a wonderful teacher to be able to, very simply explain things to people who weren't witnesses and to explain the Bible to them. And she had such an appeal. I know she brought hundreds of people into that religion, unfortunately.
What? Oh, you're kidding. Isn't that something?
No.
Now, you had related an experience to me the last time we spoke about your mom and the millions now living. You want to share that with our audience and what your mom feels about the teachings from years ago? that she had received?
Well, I know my mother is still a faithful witness, but she has at least expressed some concern to me that the promises that were given to her back in the 50s, and back then, 50s and 60s, we had a congregation overseer. She wants to go back and kind of question him. Where's that promise you said, millions now living will never die? And I had to remind her it wasn't him saying it, but the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society is the one who taught it. Not just him and the congregation he was at, but that was a worldwide teaching. She has since, my dad has died over 12 years ago, so she at first was very angry that she was going to have to go through Armageddon by herself. So she is dramatically or just desperately holding on to that hope that any day Armageddon will come and the paradise earth will be here, no matter what is being told to her otherwise.
Wow, that's amazing. Now, I know you all were in the religion prior to 1975. What was it like for you in the organization prior to that date, 1975? What was it like?
Well, what it was like first you have to remember going through the 60s was a very turbulent time for the world, especially in the United States. You had the different movements. We had the Babylon book that talked about the feet of clay, that it was the people that was going to rise up against governments. And we thought we were seeing that with the civil rights issues, the Vietnam War that was starting, the free love. The world was definitely in turmoil. Presidents were being killed, world leaders, Martin Luther King, different people were being assassinated, and it was a very turbulent time. So that when the Truth Book came out in 1968 or 69, I can't remember, basically pointing to the end, it was coming, and even though they didn't say it exactly, it was very much implied that 6,000 years of mankind history would be up in 1975, so that must logically be when God was going to bring about Armageddon. So here the Truth Book brought along studies that instead of studying with them for years, it was a 6-month course. We were getting to the point, we were telling people this may be it for you if you don't join the bandwagon of Jehovah's Witnesses and be saved before Armageddon.
Wow. How did you feel?
Well, I can remember pioneering at the time in a very rural area and telling people, we used to cover it was a large territory. We may not get back here next year, and try to point to scriptures to say the time is so close to the end that this may be your only chance. We gave out leaflets at that time, and the work we felt was really being speeded up, so everything was looking at 1975. Especially the theory was the fall of 1975. Things would probably happen because that was the beginning of the Jewish New Year. So that's what the society and witnesses thought that would be the timeline when Armageddon would come. Of course, I put off having kids, pioneering, things like that was more important than having a family. Preaching the good news was the main focus. And back then, when you pioneered, you devoted 100 hours a month to pioneering, to talking to people.
Yeah, I remember that. My mom, she wasn't regular pioneering, but she did. I think the auxiliary was like 75, and then the regular was 100. And my mom was auxiliary pioneering back then. Yeah. What about your family? Did your family make any type of decisions about their livelihood pertaining to that date?
That's a good question because in 1975, my dad, who was the supervisor of the water plants in St. Louis County with his degree as a civil engineer, decided a year before his retirement that in 1975 he was going to give up his career and go pioneer where the need was great to make sure he was in good standing to show that he is all ready for Armageddon to come in 1975. Obviously, it didn't come, and he then had to live not on a retirement the rest of his life, but he worked as a handyman and had an income of only of $100 a month. Ever
you're kidding me.
So no. He gave all that up thinking Armageddon was there that year in 1975. That's how much people believed it. The witnesses believed it.
A lot of people look at us and they say, oh, you guys were doing these things, and, that's not really the way it was. Or they don't really want to believe that people were really doing these things or being encouraged to do these things. was it really that real to you all to make those decisions when you really think about the things that they were doing? Of course it was, because
Absolutely.
he quit his job. But how was it perceived in the congregation for people to do that?
They were perceived as being spiritually strong, that, if other people could do it, they would. They applauded, and especially were given privileges because they gave up their future. My dad eventually became a temporary circuit overseer. I had talks on the district assembly. They were basically held up as an example. This is what you should be doing or you need to do. The time is so close. So, no, that was a reality back then. It wasn't someone's harebrained idea. It was a very strict reality that Armageddon was coming and people were giving up their lives to prove that they believed it wholeheartedly.
Do you see things going on today in the organization that kind of make it look similar to 1975 in terms of people listening to the society, telling them to do certain things from the platform?
Well, I see that mind control that the society has on the people that follow them, and hopefully they're losing their control. But for them to say things, don't pay attention to the Internet, don't pay attention to these worldly governments that may be investigating some sex abuse cases like what happened in Australia last year, it just shows that they can easily persuade their followers to believe what they want them to believe.
Right. I think the 1975 issue is a very good example of how people are geared up to do things, and then they're disappointed when things don't happen, and then the new light comes up, and they basically say, "Oh, this is new light, this is God's understanding." But of course, we do know that God doesn't get it wrong. So you can actually see a pattern of things. Right.
Well, when you're such a true believer, my parents didn't want to acknowledge they were wrong. They just wanted to have excuses. And so any excuse the Watchtower came out with, we may have miscalculated, the people put too much emphasis on 1975, we didn't, they kind of accepted it. They didn't stand up and say, oh, no, we believed it tooth and nail and this is what happened. They just quietly accepted it and kept going on with their life, trying to serve that organization as best they could.
What about when you were at Bethel, when you got invited to go to Bethel? What was that like?
Well, it was interesting. My husband and I, he was an ex-Bethelite. So when we married, we both were pioneering with the goal of trying to get back to Bethel to serve there, because that was like the Mecca. If you were able to serve at Bethel, that was really a wonderful thing to do. He was from the machine shop and had developed a machine or two that the society had used at the time. When I went in, I just, of course, was awe-inspired that this is actually God's house I'm serving at. So any menial job, you felt you were just worthy of doing anything. So I was in housekeeping for the first year. And then after that, that was in 1976, they tried to find other places for women because they realized it became a little bit more stable at Bethel when they had couples there instead of just single men that came and went pretty quickly. So they tried to find other jobs for the women then to be able to stay at Bethel, and I was then assigned to the upholstery shop. And I got to meet different ones, in different areas. At the time I was there in 1976, the early 76, we had branch overseers that were called in for a school and visited with some of their wives. And I remember one wife in particular was saying how that she was going through menopause. That her and her husband had been full-time workers for 20, 30 years. And she, and other branch overseers' wives, they were all having trouble going through menopause, several of the older sisters at Bethel also, because they lamented they didn't have kids. Armageddon didn't come to 75, and they said if I could do it again, they would have their family first and then go into the full-time work. So they would have best of both worlds, because it's a natural desire to want to have a family. And they were lamenting now that they were through menopause that Jehovah may not grant them fertility again in the new system. So that really impressed me, that to see these women saying this at my young age, and Armageddon didn't come in 75. In 76, by the fall of 76, we thought, you know what, we're going to do that. We're going to leave, have a family, stay in full-time work if we can, but we could still serve Jehovah and have a family and not be someone 40 years from now, because we had no date after 75. We wanted to make sure we had a family. So that kind of impressed us to leave. The weekend we left was a great exodus. There was 17 couples that left that weekend. And, of course, someone in the governing body made mention of it, in the morning worship that they have at Bethel. So it was interesting because a lot of couples then said, we're going to go have our families, and then we'll come back and serve.
So they didn't really. So you said they gave a talk about it at Bethel?
They did it in one of the governing body members were mentioning how many were leaving that weekend from the Bethel table. You know how they have morning worship and they have comments
right
at that point. Yeah, they recognized that there was a lot of couples leaving, and it was kind of a fluctuating period. But they had to. What else could they say? But they didn't say it's because we wanted to have kids. They just said that there was 17 couples leaving that weekend, and they never had that big of an exodus of couples at one time.
You mentioned that you had these conversations with these sisters that were talking and saying that they wanted to leave and that they had it to do over again, that they would have left and had a family. If you would not have had that conversation or heard that, how do you think that would have affected you, your time at Bethel?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know. It probably would have affected me differently, but I called it little cracks in the foundation. Through my career as a witness, I can look back and see little cracks that developed that got me thinking differently than just strict obedience to the Watchtower. So that was a major, you could say that was one of the major cracks that got me thinking, got my husband thinking. We decided to leave and to have a family. So, the little cracks in the foundation will gather throughout my life before the eventual big crack.
I'm telling you. Now, you mentioned to me about an experience that happened to you in the upholstery shop with, I think it was your overseer. As a woman, how did you communicate with individuals at Bethel that you had to work for?
Well, that was interesting. You're right, because they had overseers in each department, and since I was a married sister, if the brother had a problem with me, he would go to my husband, and my husband and I and the overseer. He was a single man, but the three of us would have to sit down and talk about what the problem is or what he observed, which was, to me, quite interesting. Why do that? Why can't you just talk to me myself? I'm an individual. My husband doesn't understand upholstery. He's a machinist. He designs machines over there. But that was the rule, is that, a brother can talk to a brother, and the sister was like the secondary, citizen over there sitting on the side.
So he's talking to you through your husband, or he's asking the husband questions, and the husband's got to relate it to you?
Yes, and my husband was there defending me and then talking to this man. It was just an odd situation, but you accept it as God's organization. God's rules is that, yes, women are supposed to be submissive to the men. So my man, had to come in and talk to the man overseer of that department.
Wow. Did you talk to any other sisters and hear their stories about similar experiences at Bethel?
Well, that's just the way it was handled. The governing body members at the time explained this is how problems are going to be handled. I came in when Nora was still president, and then the governing body became established in 75. We came in early 75. So during 75, we see this wonderful changes, committees being developed. You're not just up against one person like Brother Nora at the time, but you had committees. And, of course, we thought, well, if this is how we need to implement it. So we saw wonderful changes, more humane changes in the organization, so that by the time we left in the fall of 76, we thought, well, this will come out to the congregation. Eventually this will filter out. Instead of having one man, a congregation overseer, ruling everything and deciding everything, it'll be committees, which was the elder arrangement that was taking place. But unfortunately, it didn't pan out like I thought it was going to, from the top. It didn't. It really didn't. The theory was interesting, but you're dealing with mankind. You still have problems. And I just, saw that women less and less were given any encouragement. Obviously, no leadership whatsoever. To be humiliated to a young brother. I remember the little congregation we went to of 20 publishers after we left Bethel. The little 12-year-old baptized kid could lead the morning text for service, whereas all the sisters that were pioneering there couldn't, because he was a male and we were women.
Right, that's true. That's true.
Yeah. Or if there was
so
another young one there, we had to put a hat on her head to show submission to the arrangement.
Right.
I remember one time, sister, we didn't have hats. We were all looking around at each other like, who's got a hat? And they have a hanky, and one sister says, well, I have a diaper. I'll put a diaper on my head.
Oh, my goodness. I remember putting a napkin over my head, conducting Bible studies and stuff like that. And that my dad came in the house one day, and he goes, "Why?" He said, because my dad wasn't a witness at the time, and he said, "Why do you have that napkin over top of your head?" Right.
I remember that. How silly it was, but we agreed to it. We submitted to it.
Right.
You know?
That is so crazy. It is just so crazy. So, what was it like being an elder's wife at a young age for you?
Well, tremendous. The people were watching me. Was I acting out, or was I mature enough to be an elder's wife? My husband was 6 years older than I was, and yes, he was an elder, but he was already from Bethel. He was on the speaking circuit when he was up at Bethel. He had a lot of privileges. So when the elder arrangement came place in 1972, when we got married, he was appointed an elder. So like I said, I felt a lot of responsibility on me to make sure I behaved correctly, was very submissive, set a good example for the congregation, that maybe I never really played out in my youthful years. I don't know. But when I became a mother or had kids and the privileges are taken away, you're no longer a pioneer, you were really looked at as a very lowly person. So what? You're just a woman. It's your husband that's important in this organization.
Right. That's true. What did you do for work when you were raising your family? Did you work a job?
Well, I worked part-time because we moved to a rural area where it was very poor. The husband had part-time work. I had part-time work. I took my skill of upholstery, opened a little upholstery shop, but then started having kids and just was really not enjoying doing that whatsoever. And mentally I could tell I was being suppressed in the congregation, no learning of knowledge, taking care of babies. That at that time I had helped some sisters in the congregation with some home births and just loved to seek knowledge. Oh, let me learn more about this, more about the medical field, more about midwifery, things like that, that when my kids were young, I went and applied and was given the ExJW program, which was the government paid you minimum wage to go to school to become a nurse, because that was my way of getting in, because we were so poor I couldn't afford it. If I got my nursing degree, then I could go on and get my midwifery degree. And that's the route in the United States to really practice legally in most states, and the state had changed, and that's why I looked my focus that way, is that you have to become a certified nurse midwife to practice midwifery. The old lay midwives, or women who just helped other women, was being done away with in the 70s. But there was a home birth movement, so I was part of that home birth movement, went ahead and got my nursing degree, which I know my husband had a lot of grief. If he wasn't the presiding overseer at the time, the other families very much looked down that he allowed me to go do that. But he's like, well, she's not getting a career. She's helping she's helping the friends. Look at all the sisters that come to her for a home birth type deal. So they kind of accepted it. When I went on to midwifery school, was accepted down at Baylor College of Medicine. It happened to be that the city overseer at the time was one of our good friends from St. Louis. So, of course, he didn't say anything to us. He loved having us there in the city where he was at. He knew, our background, what we were like, knew our families. And so he, absolutely told everyone, forget it, keep your nose out of their business. This is what they're doing. And again, applying the ideas that I was helping the sisters in the congregation.
See, isn't that amazing how you say you're going to college and you're getting a skill, you're learning something, and yet people in the congregation are looking down on you for doing that. How did they find out you were in college?
I remember when we came into Houston, and this was the first time in a long time my husband wasn't the presiding overseer of the congregation. And the presiding overseer's wife, when she introduced herself, she goes, oh, what are you here for? And I said, I'm going to midwifery school. She goes, boy, you haven't been a witness very long, have you?
Oh, my goodness.
And I said to her, we're ex-Bethelites, and yes, I have all my life. And she just was aghast. And so, yes, they very much were judgmental on that I was going to school. But like I said, because the city overseer could over-trump the presiding overseer, they were told to keep their nose out of our business.
See, that was good for you because for a lot of people that didn't happen, where somebody would say, keep your nose out of your business. Right. But you know what I think is really interesting about your experience going to college is that when I talk to people today, they will say, I know people that go to college, I know people that have got their degree, and then they'll say, well, the society has relaxed their, the way they feel about people going to college and everything. But I like the fact that what you're saying about your experience because people need to know exactly what was taking place back in the day when people went to college. They did not look too favorably upon you for doing that.
Right. In the 70s, we knew of brothers that the society, when we were at Bethel, we knew they sent several brothers to law school while we were at Bethel. So how can you condemn me for going to midwifery school thinking this will be great in this system, but even more so in the new system, I could help, knowing that Bethel had sent brothers to law school, sent them to college. So I think in some ways it did kind of help that we were ex-Bethelites. They kind of overlooked what I was doing at the time.
Right. So how did things pan out for you with your degree in the work field? What did you do?
Once I got out of school, we realized that obviously I could make more money than my husband. He was a contractor. He remodeled homes. And we were very much the family type that we had our kids at home. We were homeschooling our kids. So we moved to an area, one of the places I interviewed the state wouldn't allow homeschooling, so we crossed that place off my list and found a location that offered me a position. The state was favorable for homeschooling, and so we moved there, and my husband was the presiding overseer in the congregation that we were involved with, and then he stayed at home and, took care of the kids while I earned the money. And I also felt this also gave him time to be like the super elder. He was again giving district talks. He was available during the day if they had special elders meetings, things like that he was available to do to climb up the ladder of the Watchtower Society.
Wow, that's amazing. Now, this is the first time I've ever heard of a story like this before. But how did the friends in the congregation feel about you working and your husband being the stay-at-home person with the kids? They kind of
had to accept it. What could they say? He was the presiding overseer. They couldn't complain much. If they complained to the circuit overseer, well, by then, you get to know the circuit overseers, and if they hear you're ex-Bethelites, they kind of were a little bit more lenient. And I'm trying to think, I may have influenced one or two women to go on, and I remember one woman went to get her nursing degree because she wanted to be an L&D nurse because she saw that I was in midwifery. So, but others strictly went by. If the Watchtower said no degrees, and they went along with that. But I didn't hear that much complaints to me about doing that.
You make a good point. You were able to influence other people. Now you can really see why they don't want to have you going to college, because it would be like a wildfire, and other people would start doing it based on the example that you were showing. So, I mean, that's a good point for our viewing audience to really, take a listen to what you said there. I think that was an excellent point, that you encouraged two ladies to do something else.
Right. Well, the thing is, you had to it was a game. When I look back on it, it's a game you played that you're submissive. But on the other hand, they could see that I was independent. So I remember one family, I delivered two of her babies. It was in the hospital setting at that point. But they had recently became witnesses, and she went out and became a physical therapist because she knew that she would rather make sure she had a painting job. She owned her own painting business, painting houses, but she was getting tired of that. And she thought, well, I'll go on to college and become a physical therapist and not have to work out in the hot sun anymore. So, women who thought about it, I think, took my example and realized that they didn't have to work the menial jobs. They didn't have to be the little housekeepers or the, home that come into cleaning the homes and stuff, that they could maybe look at other jobs that are available to them.
You had talked about your job as a midwife, and you went to school to get your associates in midwifery?
In nursing. In
nursing,
associates in nursing and a certificate in midwifery.
Okay.
Whereas nowadays you have to have your master's degree to practice midwifery. So I was grandfathered in because I did that back in the 80s.
Okay. I think when you and I had spoken about the blood issue, that's what it was. You brought out a very good point about your job and the blood issue. You want to talk about a little bit about that?
Sure, because I can remember as a nursing student, I even refused to go the day that we were supposed to go to Red Cross to help them with collecting blood. And the place I was at, one of the sisters, again, an elder's wife, was a nurse at the local hospital. In fact, she was a supervisor. That means she really knew a lot, had been working as a nurse for a while. So I approached her and said, what do you do about the blood issue? You know, if I don't receive blood myself, and I made a stand in school not to even go learn the process from the Red Cross, how do you handle it being the supervisor? She said to me, I feel it's between them and their doctors. You know, I'm not going to interfere with their relationship with their doctor and the agreement they have on treatment. And I looked at that and I thought that's very good because we don't want someone interfering with our doctor-patient relationship. If we refuse blood, then why should we step in and, not perform the duties that we are assigned to do because we don't agree with their philosophy in life to accept blood? So that kind of opened my eyes at that point. Then with a clear conscience, if I needed to, someone needed blood and the doctor ordered it, I had no problem contacting the blood bank, performing my duties as a nurse. When I became a midwife, I even got into the authority. I ordered blood. If someone was hemorrhaging and the hemorrhage wasn't able to be controlled, yes, I knew how to order blood products, and I did so with the mind, with the mental acrobatics that this was between this is their philosophy of life and not mine, so I shouldn't interfere and make them believe my philosophy at a time like this.
Wow. Did you ever share that information with anybody in your congregation, the way you worked at your job? Okay.
No, not really, because I don't think they would understand. A lot of times the witnesses are just no blood, period. Don't listen to the rationale, no blood. But I was the type that always questioned hematologists. Back in the 90s, it was they're trying to get a fluorocarbon available, especially for EMTs or paramedics, that it would carry hemoglobin. They could use it on anyone. It'd be a universal donor. But scientifically, they cannot replace blood. What the hemoglobin does in blood, scientists, medicine people have not been able to replace. So blood is the only answer at this point.
Okay. That's the only thing that they can't really make something synthetic for that blood?
No, they can't.
Okay.
You have different products of blood, but the red blood cell itself is what carries the oxygen. When you're on low on red blood cells and your body can't get the oxygen, then that's when your body starts dying. And there's nothing scientifically now, nothing that can replace that red blood cell. And that's why many times it's as simple as you need some blood transfusions, which is red blood cells. You don't need the whole blood, but you need the red blood cell that has the hemoglobin carrying the oxygen carrying capacity of the hemoglobin. So nothing can replace it. I understand that scientifically. So would I explain it to other people? Would I tell my fellow witnesses? No, I figured that's their conscience, the decisions they made.
Because you probably would have had a whole lot more backlash in the congregation if people knew that you were ordering blood to have people transfused. Did you ever encounter any Jehovah's Witnesses as your patients that needed blood?
As my patients, no, but working in the hospital, you not only have your patients, but there's other patients. And I would see in another practice someone dealing with a witness patient that was hemorrhaging and knowing that they were going to probably do everything they can, but if she was hemorrhaging that bad, she'd probably end up dead. I did have one case where, as I was practicing as a witness, that she was bleeding a lot. I got my surgeon in after a vaginal delivery because of her particular circumstance, and we were able to save her. But she did get very low with her blood, but she kept refusing a blood transfusion, but she did make it through, But I could see the anesthesiologist, who happened to be Muslim at the time, he was doing his little prayers to God to make sure this woman gets saved. My surgeon was an excellent surgeon, discovered the problem, helped take care of it, and it just takes time for the body to rebuild those, red blood cells, and she was willing to wait it out, and that worked out well. But no, But on the other hand, I have seen witnesses who have died because of their stand on blood, and you can't replace that simple element of blood to replace what blood is lost.
Wow, that's amazing. So you really look back on your life and you had a really good career as a nurse, and also, just like you said, you had all these different cracks in the foundation of this religion with your family, going to Bethel, looking at all the different things in the congregation. What was the pivotal moment that really helped you and your husband see this is not the truth?
Well, I think waking up in the 90s, realizing what we saw at Bethel, the changes that take place never did, filter down to the congregation. It really upset me how people were treated. If you were kicked out, you weren't given forgiven. There was no grace. There was no, it's called, there's no grace. We didn't know what grace was. Undeserved kindness of God, what does that mean? It was a very harsh religion. I kept looking at how people were treated and how harsh that was. And I think at the time in the late 90s, my husband, who had always gotten on computers, he built his own computer back in the 70s, was very computer literate, started reading sites, and he would just drop hints to me. Of course, he was scared. He knew that if I found out he was looking on the computer on any sites that weren't, witnesses sanctioned, that I would report him. It's very much a Gestapo-type situation.
Yep.
But I had always, the background was I was there at Bethel when Ray and Cynthia Franz was at Bethel. Ray was the most considerate, loving member of the governing body, very reasonable. And I had heard, when he left, we read the Time magazine article, and then later it filtered out he wrote some books, and someone said, well, if you ever read his books, you'll never be a witness. By the late 90s, early 2000, I think I slowly figured out my husband was saying something, and I said, you're reading Ray's books. He said, you want to read it? If I let you read it, you won't tell on me, basically. So I said, of course I want to read it. I didn't know how to get a hold of his books. And I put a Bible cover on it, could not put it down for 3 days. I don't care if it was the meeting or whatever. I read it constantly, the Crisis of Conscience book, and my world literally fell apart. I could not put one foot in front of the other for several days. My head was spinning with what I learned. So that was the big house of cards that fell, was to read Ray's book, Crisis of Conscience, and then In Search of Christian Freedom. And we couldn't just say, okay, we don't want to be witnesses anymore, bye-bye. My husband at the time said, it's reasonable for us to take this slowly. Let's see what happens. And as a woman, it was very interesting because I can remember the last talk I gave thinking, this is the last talk I'm ever going to give. I was the type that if anyone wasn't there, I was called on. I was always willing to volunteer and do things.
Right.
And so it was easy. I never gave another talk. No one noticed. I quit commenting at the Watchtower. No one noticed. As a woman, I could easily. And then I started having excuses. Well, my mother-in-law was going through cancer, so I was starting to miss meetings. No one noticed. No one said anything. It's just everyone's so concerned how they appear to the rest of the congregation. They don't notice when you slowly start fading away. But unfortunately, they won't just let you fade away. They came after us. We tried to for about a year and a half, just slowly. The husband was relinquishing his responsibilities, doing this or doing that. But no, they came after us, and eventually, I never heard. No one came and told me. They did have a judicial committee meeting. I went to it. My first question the elder asked me was, tell me about what you think about the blood. And I said to them, tell me what the blood policy is. They said, well, we'd have to go home and look it up. And I said, well, don't have an accident between here and home, and you have to make a decision about your life without knowing it. And I got up and walked out. So no one ever came and told me, but I heard through the grapevine. I guess I was disfellowshipped.
Oh, wow. So you did go to a committee meeting, didn't you and your husband both?
Yes. He sat there for 4 hours. I got up and walked out. I said, they have no power over me. I'm not going to listen to this. So, but he tried to convince, because this was his friends. This was his buddies for 20, 30 years. He was an elder all his adult life. He was trying to appeal to these men. Listen to yourself, listening to the reasoning, whatever. So he had the patience to sit there, but I was like, no, they're out to get me. They don't really understand the blood policy. Why do I have to submit to people who truly don't understand think nothing of it for people to give their lives over an issue that they don't understand and God doesn't require. So anyway, they never came. They never came and told me that I was disfellowshipped. No one ever came after that to my door. I quit going to meetings. It was an abrupt stop then. They're going to announce I'm disfellowshipped, I'm not there.
Right.
But none of the elders ever acknowledged as a woman to come to me and say, you know, we're sorry to see you go, or this is what we need to do, we're announcing this. Never did. For the longest time, I told my mother, I don't know. I don't know if I'm disfellowshipped or not. I don't know what's going on.
Did she live in the same area that you lived in, your mother?
No, she lives about 3 or 4 hours away.
Okay.
So during
she
that
wasn't
time
in the
period,
same congregation?
She wasn't in the same congregation. No, we had, you know, she was. My dad was living at the time, and in 2001, not officially kicked out yet, I had to watch him die over the blood issue. He had his aorta was dissecting or tearing apart. They were trying to stabilize him. Obviously, you need blood products for open heart surgery like that. And he didn't make it. They were, you know, they stabilized it. It quit tearing, but then eventually, you know, they were trying to build his blood back up because he had a punctured bladder. One of the nursing personnel punctured his bladder while putting a catheter in. Just complications that he eventually just blew his aorta and died. So he basically died.
Oh, man,
over the
sorry
blood
to hear that.
Yeah, they could have that night gone ahead with surgery had he agreed to blood products that I kept telling the elders that were coming in. He can have Hemopure, he can have fractions. Even the hospital committee didn't keep up with what was current with the Watchtower. That's why it was very frustrating. And then later that fall, my father-in-law died for the blood issue. He had a bleeding hemorrhoid. He was in another state. I know. Can you imagine how frustrating that is, knowing, you know, blood could save these people's lives, could extend their lives. And again, he, you know, stood firm, no blood products. My husband at the time went up there, you know, to say this is what he can have, this is what he can't have. Well, first of all, since he was disfellowshipped, you know, his sisters and brother-in-law wouldn't listen to him, wouldn't do anything about it. And he kept saying, get the hospital committee in, this is what he can have, this is what you can do. And they basically overloaded his father with IV fluids, thinking, you know, a little fluid to expand the red blood cells will help, to eventually it filled up his lungs and he died. So, again, over the blood issue. Over the blood issue,
so you're
my
saying that your husband, what you're saying here then is that the local body of elders did not keep abreast of the society's changes in the blood, and your husband knew all that, but because he's disfellowshipped, no one wants to hear him and what he has to say.
Exactly. And even the local hospital committee did not keep up, because we could tell them, this is where you need to look this information. This is the Watchtower. This is the quote. This is the, you know, the hospital liaison committee book that you have. This is what you can use. And they'd look it up and they'd go, oh, yeah, you're right. Well, too late. Decisions have to be made in a timely fashion. You don't have time to run home and look things up. So it's very frustrating to deal with people who are not educated and especially don't keep up with the medical field and don't understand the policies the Watchtower has in place.
Well, I feel that to all of our listening people that's listening to this program today, if you're a Jehovah's Witness and you're listening to Joy Grant, you need to make sure that you are keeping up on the Watchtower policies, because a lot of people's lives are at stake. Me and my husband were in a congregation with a brother who needed a kidney transplant. And one of the elders that was on the body, he said that we need to get a judicial case together because that brother is not supposed to be getting a kidney transplant. And my husband came home from the elders meeting, and he shook his head. He said, I cannot believe. He says, it's a good thing that all the other brothers that were in that body of elders, in that meeting, he says, it's a good thing they were all there, because that one brother was an older brother, and he had not kept up with the Watchtower changes. But my husband said, can you imagine if all the brothers in the room were of his mindset, that brother would have never got that kidney. You know?
Exactly.
And that's what you're seeing around the country and the world.
Right. They're not educated men that are put into that power of authority. Elders are not. It's rare to find a college-educated person in that position.
It's a scary thing.
It is very scary. That shows the leap of faith the witnesses have in their organization. Truly leap of faith to believe whatever the Watchtower puts out. Like Jim Jones, they believed him all the way. It's just a different aspect of the same situation.
Right. So you have literally seen it all because, like you said, you were in the organization when Noor was the president, and not only were you in the organization, but you were up at Bethel. You were also at Bethel at the same time that Ray Franz and his wife Cynthia were there. You also told me about the brothers that I think they worked in translation that worked with Ray Franz, or they knew Ray Franz.
Translators.
Yeah, you want to tell that story?
Well, one of the housekeepers, the housekeepers on a certain floor would all get together for break. That's your way of socializing at Bethel, especially among the sisters. And one of the sisters that was on my floor was Norma Sanchez. Her husband and her obviously went to the Spanish congregation. He was a translator, good friends of Ray and Cynthia. And in 1980, when Ray was asked to leave, they were part of the other 5 Bethelites that were kicked out at the time because they realized the translating from Spanish to English and English to Spanish, things did not come through like the Watchtower wanted to. They saw more humanity in the Bible than what the Watchtower was portraying. So that's where the Spanish translators then started questioning, what about this? What about that policy? Why are we translating it this way? And so when Ray and Cynthia was kicked out, there was 5 Bethelites that were kicked out with them, and my former friend, Norma Sanchez, was one of them. So also one of the other ones that the Spanish congregation, or the Spanish translators or people who spoke Spanish were in the Spanish congregations. Another friend of Ray's, him and his wife, were in the district work in the Spanish side. And once they came down against Ray and his way of thinking, they just basically walked away from the district work because they could see the society's teaching and what the Bible says is 2 different things, and it was very harsh.
Yeah, that's pretty bad.
After we had left the organization, my husband and I became friends with Ray and Cynthia again. They were close by in the area because I wanted to make sure his book survived beyond his death. He was getting older, and they would be published and keep being published or printed so that other witnesses can see what the thinking is of the governing body. And when I said to him, how come a lot of people who leave the organization are ex-Bethelites or people who have responsibility in the congregation? And he says, because when you know what the kitchen is like, you know what the restaurant does. And I thought that was an excellent example, that those who have, who are higher up or are close to the big power or see what it's like back at Bethel or in the circuit work or district work, you know how this organization works, and you see the downfall of it. You see the rats in the kitchen.
That's true. Well, what was it like? What was Ray Franz like?
Oh, a very humble person. You talk about a true Christian. So humble. He relied on his faith with God and Christ, just because I asked him, how did you leave an organization? They didn't have a family. Him and Cynthia didn't have a family. And to be able to go out after living your life, he was 60 years old when they kicked him out. And he said it took a tremendous amount of reliance on God, prayer to God, that things would work out. So that, to me, he was a man of great faith and true Christian faith, not just obedience to an organization.
Mm-hmm. I wonder, do you ever wonder what would have happened to a lot of us that left the organization had we not had Ray Franz's book?
I think he accelerated a lot of us in leaving. I really do.
Mm-hmm.
Who knows? Without that, we would have put up thinking, yes, we're human beings, and human beings have faults, but Jehovah sees. I still hear it in my brother and sister-in-law. Jehovah sees. He'll correct things. But you know what? They're still drinking the Kool-Aid. They don't understand it's not Jehovah. It's the Watchtower that's directing these policies.
Right. How many people in your family are Jehovah's Witnesses?
I'm the only one who left.
Okay.
In my family, I'm the only one who left. So my father, before he died, I did kind of warn him that they may be coming after us, and he said, I'll never shun you, which is dear to my heart, because I think he was high enough. He saw the wickedness in the organization, the manipulation, the treating bad of people. But my mother shuns me. My sister has not spoken to me since my dad's funeral. My brothers, they don't talk to me.
Wow. Sometimes you have to have a bad experience, too, for some people. I mean, we didn't have a bad experience before we left because we just saw the hypocrisy and the changes that they made. But some of the people that we talked to after they left, they actually had a bad experience that woke them up to something that wasn't right. So your family, they obviously haven't had a bad experience yet.
Exactly. I always say you'll stay with what you know until it becomes uncomfortable to stay any longer. So once we woke up and realized what was going on, it wasn't comfortable for us to stay a witness anymore. So you're right, they have not become so uncomfortable. I keep thinking my mom with the way she's questioning, but then she's still that idea of living forever, that it's coming soon, the paradise is here soon, the world's so bad. That is so implanted in her mind that she can't, she knocks everything reality out of the way.
Do you think it's because of her age that she really is looking forward to the promises because she, doesn't have anything else to look forward to in this life?
Exactly. The age and the idea of the resurrection, to be able to see her husband again, to see my dad. She cannot let that go.
But remember the teaching that the Jehovah's Witnesses had about the resurrection and you wouldn't be getting married? What did she say about that?
I know, but how everyone talks behind. Everyone says, yeah, that's what they teach. But Jehovah certainly would be, sympathetic and let us have our husbands back or let us have our mates back. Even though the Bible said there would be neither male nor female, we don't understand that. So you make up your own little stories to believe what you want to believe, and she's still making up that story that she'll be able to be back with her husband in the new system, and that's what she believes. At 89, I'm not going to change her mind. She has lived her life. She has lived all her adult life believing that Armageddon is coming anytime. Why should I change it?
It's a twofold thing for you because you want your mother to be able to hold on to her hope, but at the same time, you've lost your relationship with your mom.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the only bad thing.
Right, and that's a shame.
Yeah, it is. Now, what would you say to women today? For any woman that's listening, either she's a Jehovah's Witness, she's a person that belongs to a high control group. What type of advice would you give to a woman who's being held down by her faith?
Well, I would like to, first of all, quote some Bible examples, is that I always looked at women of the Bible like Ruth or Queen Esther. They had positions of power, and they used it. They weren't someone that depended on men. So I like to think of those examples. If you're a woman in the congregation, a lot of times, you're not encouraged to be self-sufficient. But think about it. If something happened to your husband or you get a divorce, how are you going to support yourself? You can't rely. You can never box yourself into, I can't leave this man no matter how bad he's treating me. You need to be independent. You need to look out for yourself and make sure you're showing your kids especially what a healthy environment looks like. So if you're in a relationship with a man that's very destructive, very dysfunctional, even if you're a witness, look to see how you can get out of it for the sake of your kids, for your own sanity, for your own self-esteem. And there's nothing wrong with learning. There's nothing wrong with education. Well, the Bible says taking in knowledge is, what's that scripture? How we used to tell people, door to door, you need to take in knowledge of the Bible. Well, apply that to your life. You need to take in knowledge of life to support yourself.
That is so true. Any other words of wisdom you want to give to our listening audience before we close?
Well, I just, a couple things. One, as I was leaving the witnesses, like I briefly stated earlier, that organization does not teach grace. I did not understand what the grace of God was, what it truly meant to forgive other people, to be kind to other people, and to have self-esteem. Even though I was a midwife, was, prominent in the congregation, as a woman, I had no self-esteem whatsoever. No self-esteem. And it took good therapy. If you are leaving the organization, as one woman wrote, she became a therapist. She was a special pioneer in Canada. She became a therapist to figure out why she got sucked into all these different beliefs. She has a good book out about exiting the JWs. And she calls it that we go through post-traumatic stress syndrome when we leave that organization because we were under such tight mind control. We don't know it at the time, but you do. So you need to get help, get therapy, whatever, to help you deprogram all the thoughts that were cleverly planted in your brain by that organization.
That is most definitely true.
I feel sorry for people who are walk-away believers. They know they can't live the lifestyle. It's a high-standard lifestyle, so they walk away still believing they have the truth and beating themselves up constantly because they can't maintain that high standard. Whereas I want people to realize it's okay, we're all human, but you need to find help. You need to find someone, not to isolate yourself, but to find a therapist, to find maybe groups of people who've been there to understand what you're going through.
Okay. That is so true.
That would, to help, because otherwise you could spiral down into a depression. Look at people who have post-traumatic stress disorder. If they don't get help, the chemistry in your brain doesn't change around, you can, get into deep trouble with depression, with suicidal thoughts, with wanting to do harm to others because of what you felt or what you now perceive as being harmful thoughts that were given to you. So get help. Do not feel so isolated. Get out there and get help. There is plenty of help available, especially on the Internet. Someone made a good statement recently that if I ever ran into a witness who knew me, I could say to them now, are you still one of Jehovah's Witnesses? Oh, you must not have the Internet, or you must not have a computer, because what a lot of ExJWs are trying to expose, the thinking of the Watchtower, the mind control of the Watchtower, and that it's a cult. It definitely is a mind control group.
Definitely. Do you know everyone that I Google that I used to be friends with in the organization? If I Google them to see if they have a Facebook page, I only mainly see their husbands out there. I don't see the females. The husbands may have a Google Plus or a Twitter page, but the women that I was friends with in the organization, they don't have anything. And so this is all part of the training of the woman, taking a back seat and not doing anything on her own accord.
Right. Well, here in the Muslim community, we can see the women wearing the hijab or their head guard, and I think, those poor women. But the witnesses, they may not have a visible evidence, but their demeanor, their mentality, everything about them is very submissive or submissive to their men, to the organization and to the men, and they are nothing in that organization.
And like you said, it took you a while to get your self-esteem back, and you're definitely, telling people to look for help outside of the organization, because post-traumatic stress is definitely something that we all experience, and you can't do this by yourself. You definitely can't.
Right, you can't do it by yourself. You're a closed society. And the Jehovah's Witnesses are not so unique. Mormons are similar. You leave the Mormons, you have that same experience. That's why there's a lot of stress out there. Muslims, if they leave the Muslim community, anytime you have a closed society, you're going to have problems. You're going to have the child abuse issue. You're going to have the men who are constantly downgrading the women, very dysfunctional relationships. So there's, therapists understand that what you're going through, you have got to acknowledge and understand what you're going through. And with their help, then you can see it.
Right.
The other thing I was going to say that I worry about with my mom is she's a typical woman in the congregation. I think she's one of the oldest in her congregation. And do they pay any attention to her? I warned her once, my dad died, that watch, the elders won't come around. They're not concerned. Oh, they came around once to make sure they got my dad's Kingdom Hall key from her. And she is like the little old lady that everyone snickers about, doesn't want to go out in service with, doesn't want to help her. So, she's thinking the congregation will step in when she gets older and needs help. No, they won't. They're not exhibiting it right now. If you don't keep up with that organization as a young, healthy person, you're discarded. They have no respect for the older ones in the congregation.
You're definitely right. Yep, because they're throwaways. I mean, you can't do it. It's like, what have you done for me lately? And the other thing that I saw when I was in the organization is that all of the loyalty that Jehovah's Witnesses, had over the years, you're not paid back. And even in these other churches, they really have high respect for their older people. But Jehovah's Witnesses don't organize any type of a charity events for their faithful older ones at all.
No, it's only what you can do for that organization, period. You're only as good as your last time slip, last comment at the meeting, last talk you gave, last time you pioneered, etc.
That's true. Okay. So this brings us to the end of our program, And I want to thank Joy for being on our show. She has been a wealth of information, a very encouraging lady. And I think that for those of you that tuned into our audience can definitely appreciate having her as a guest and listening to her on our show. Thank you so much.
Thank you for allowing me to come on and to explain my experience. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Absolutely. I really appreciate that. And not only that, but if we get individuals that would be interested in doing a call-in show and they may want to call and ask you questions, would you be interested in doing that?
Absolutely.
Okay. That's great.
I'm an open book. My policy now is nothing to hide. Open policy.
Okay.
Ask me anything. I'll be happy to tell you.
Okay. Well, thanks so much for being on the Critical Thought, Joy, and we will definitely be in touch.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Lady C. This was wonderful. Thank you.
Okay.
If you've been in the struggle and want to appear as a guest on our show, email us at exjwct@gmail.com. The views and opinions of our guests do not necessarily reflect the opinions of critical thinkers.
This program was sponsored by Critical Thinkers.